Okay, we're going to begin now. A couple of days ago, I went to see Olavo to discuss the book, and we had a really good discussion. And I have been listening today to a lecture by another man. His name is Andrew Kern. And he was giving a seminar at a homeschool conference. And I was listening to a CD of his speech. And in his speech, he explained and exhorted the home educators in the audience to take a classical view of education and to reject the naturalistic view, which is the underpinning of our secular humanistic worldview. And in his very passionate speech, he said many of the same things Olavo had said to me just 2 nights ago. And he put it in context in a new way for me. So now I understand a little better the big picture of what we are talking about in studying this book by Levis. So I would like to share with you a few thoughts about that before we go to the text. Now, it seems that the predominant philosophy in the early 20th century was modernism. And now we are beyond modernism into postmodernism. Now, modernism more or less began with Darwin and Francis Bacon and Dewey, who took Bacon's material and ran with it. And before these philosophers came on the scene, people had more of a Christian worldview. And there was, in the classical worldview, there was an appreciation for understanding the nature of things. You did not care so much about how much something weighed, what its measurements are. You cared about what it was in terms of its nature. And wisdom was seeking to understand the truth behind the things we deal with in the world. Then, as modernism began to take over, and with Descartes with his, as we've been speaking of, Cartesian system, these thinkers all began to put forth the idea that that which can be measured is all there is. Reality consists of what can be grasped rationally. There is nothing beyond what a human mind can grasp. And all of reality was reduced to that which is quantifiable. Now, from the standpoint of Andrew Kern, what he was saying today, he was saying that we are not only in a post Christian world, in a postmodern world. He said we are in a post-human world. And he pointed out how C.S. Lewis and Dorothy Sayers and F.R. Levis, they saw what was coming in the very beginning, and now it is here. They foresaw the dehumanization of people. They foresaw the incredible bloodbath of the 20th century with World War I and World War II and with the genocidal massacres, and even in America with the wholesale murder of the unborn. And we, who have been raised in the second half of the 20th century, have been swimming in blood and not even noticing. Because through education, the horrors have been reduced. We've become callous, and their horrific element has been removed. So now I have a situation where my Christian children listen to the most horrible, profane, violent, heinous music and lyrics, and they say, well, it doesn't have the F word, it must be okay. Just today, my son asked me, this song says, damn you to hell, over and over again. He said, is that cursing? Because if it's curse words, he is supposed to delete the song. And so he's asking, well, damn is not so bad, and hell is not so bad, so this does not have profanity in it, so it's not cursing. And I tried to explain to him that what we look at is the nature of what is being said. And the nature of it is to curse a person to hell. Therefore, it is cursing. For him, cursing is to speak profane words. My children watch movies with the most horrible violence, callous and cruel and evil. And it does not grieve them. It excites them. They like it. They watch movies with immoral sex displayed constantly. And they say, it's not that bad. They had a sheet over them. Or it's not that bad. There was only a little bit of nudity. But they don't recognize that the entire movie was about people who are in the most egregious condition of the soul. They can't see it. Andrew Kern said, quoting C.S. Lewis, that almost every person on this planet is knowingly or unknowingly contributing to the system of thought which is destroying the human race. And I thought, oh, every person? Does that mean me? And then he went on to speak of Christian homeschoolers who have their children tested to see whether their children are being educated. And if the numbers are high, they're satisfied. Even if the child doesn't know the nature of things. But the child knows facts, the child can do mathematics, the child can pass a standardized test. And the parent says, I am a success because my child's numbers are high. And they tell the child, you are intelligent, you are valuable because your numbers are high. This reducing of humanity to something quantifiable is part and parcel with the atheistic, humanistic, modernistic worldview. Olavo told me that the best education I could give to my son, who is 14, and he wants to be a lawyer. The best education I could give him was to require him to interview people every week to learn their stories. And then to either tell me the story or write it out. Because, Olavo said, stories are never banal. Banal means commonplace and not valuable, just like a bit of dirt to throw down, common, uninteresting, unimportant. He said stories, human stories, are never banal. But, he said, many people cannot tell a story. You, as the hearer, have to put their story together for them. Because many people have not developed their thinking to a high enough level to where they can see cause and effect, and to where they can abstract general truth from specific incidents. So you have the case where the woman with tears in her eyes tells simple facts. I let my son play outside. He disappeared. The police did nothing. I didn't see him again. It was 20 years ago. I don't know what happened to him. That's it. That's the best she can do. And from that, an educated person will evoke a world of meaning. The reason that we are learning from Levis that we must study literature is because literature is full of stories. Real human stories. Stories with truth in them. When I say truth, I don't mean little t truth. I mean big T truth. Big T truth exists in the third realm. Olavo said, quoting another philosopher, that the difference between the world of an educated man and the world of an ignorant man is comparable to the difference between the world of a human being and the world of a goose, an animal. An educated person has all of history in his world. An educated person has a culture that is his own. And he is also familiar with other cultures. And he understands that what is culturally appropriate and seems normative for him is only cultural, is only arbitrary, and another way is equivalent. But he can also distinguish between what is universal and what is a relative option. An educated man has full command of language, his mother tongue, and he swims in it, and he moves in it, and he breathes it, and it becomes a part of him. He understands it, and it is him. And his mother tongue is directly correlated, piece for piece, with all of human experience. So he is able to pin down and describe the stars and the expanse of space and the infinitely small and the infinitely large and even that which cannot be known. He can almost pin down and build a housing for and describe with words. The mother tongue, the language, is the priceless tool and jewel of the educated man. And it is connected with his knowledge of everything. For the ignorant, history does not exist. Even a person's personal history doesn't really exist because the ignorant man cannot connect the dots. The ignorant man cannot, when he is in trouble, remember a great hero of literature who had the same trouble and was vindicated in the end. When the ignorant man has trouble, he suffers like an animal, unreflectively. He cannot explode his suffering into a larger context of broader human experience and thereby light it up with transcendent light and make it bearable that way. I think studying this book by Levis is very good for us, even though it is going very slowly. I suggested to Olavo that I read through to the end of the chapter that we are doing, and we are going to stop at the end of this chapter, that I read through quickly and then discuss the whole thing with him so that I will have the big picture, which I have never had up until now and still don't have. But he said no. He said, take it a little at a time. That is better. Now, after hearing Andrew Kern today, I realized that the modernistic approach to thought is ingrained in me, the way my mother tongue is ingrained in me. It is part of who I am, because I am a child of this age. I was educated in the environment of modernism and beginning postmodernism. So for me to meditate on the arguments that Levis is bringing forth, debunking the assumptions of the modernists, is a very good therapy for me. It's a medicine for the sickness of thought which is the result of my upbringing and education. And probably it's the same way for you. So, we will continue, and I will try to share with you some of Olavo's extra ideas as we go through. Hold on. I'm just scanning my notes to see if there's anything else I wanted to say before we start. I think not. Okay. Today we will begin on page 41, but we'll start by reading the last chapter of page 40, because that will give us a running start and remind us of last week. If you have any thoughts or questions at any time, please send them in and interrupt, because I would love to have more interaction with you. So, I'm beginning on page 40 with the last paragraph. Actually, I think I will just quickly read the quote that the paragraph deals with. I will probably not stop to comment on much of it unless something hits me that Olavo said. But I'll begin with the quote on page 40, and then the new material begins on page 41. Just a minute, I need to move something. Bothering my back. Okay, let's see how it is. Page 40, beginning with the quote, in the old debate. In the old debate about whether the individual is more important than the group, or the other way around, the issues have been obscured by the constant use of the expression, the individual, because, strictly speaking, there's no such thing as the individual, but only many individuals. An equally careless hypostatization underlies the frequently repeated cliché about man being able to control his future, often phrased as a rhetorical question. For as soon as we ask who is man, we see that he does not exist, and there are only men and women with varied and largely incompatible sentiments, dispositions, and aims. No doubt they could control many things if they would only agree, but they do not. Therefore, to speak of man deciding or controlling is nonsense. Once we get rid of this linguistic mirage, we can see that the liberal, philosophical individualists were true collectivists in the sense of defending the interests of many individuals, as opposed to the prerogative of the powerful few. So you can see the modernist view here, that man, with a capital M, does not exist because it can't be quantified. The only thing that exists is individual men, each of whom can be written on a list. I'm continuing with Levis's commentary. This illustrates very usefully excuse me, the danger inseparable from Andreski's necessary common sense. The strong common sense is necessary to his function of exposing the follies, fatuities, and pretensions of social science and social studies. To say this is to grant implicitly that the disciplined robustness of mind and purpose, with the command of knowledge that accompanies it, has, in the study of civilized society, our civilization being what it is, a respectable positive function. But the quoted passage demonstrates that when the standards that make it respectable prevail, the danger remains and is, in fact, accentuated. For the common sense spirit, reinforced by the insidious half-assurance that it has acquired the authority of science in becoming disciplined, tends to be a good deal worse than not enough, and our cultural habit, which knows of no better guide, desperately needs not confirmation, but the most sharp, disturbing, and insistent of challenges. It is revealing how confidently Andreski reduces the issues to the futility of the old debate. For his way of exposing the old futility is to present us, in his own terms, with what is essentially the same thing. What is futile is his offer of logical cogency, but what that offer actually represents is an endorsement of an discouraging actuality, the reign of reductive common sense. Once we get rid of this linguistic mirage, we can see that the liberal philosophical individualists were true collectivists, in the sense of defending the interests of many individuals, as opposed to the prerogative of the powerful few, whereas, ... collectivist ideologies, ... Moving on. It won't, I think, be concluded that I opt for collectivist ideologies. The assumption inherent in the phrase linguistic mirage, this is the gravamen of my charge against Andreski, amounts to a refusal or an inability to recognize an essential truth about the nature of humanitas and life. It means that a solution of the problem he poses, or doesn't he feel himself need to pose, must necessarily be in some sense collectivist. The liberal philosophical individualists, of whom he approves as true collectivists, are, as such, committed to an account of society in basic and reductive terms of collectivity. And where you have collectivist liberal philosophies of society, you are likely to have also the collectivist ideologies that he obviously, as I do, hates. But my main point is that he has condemned himself to the inconsistencies, his sense of which make him uneasy. He can't explain why it is that we may still, he contends, entertain hope. He speaks of the need for ethical promptings and impulsions, but seems to think of them as products of the clear and logical thought, the possibility of which they are to impel us to preserve or restore. Though he refers to first-rate creative work achieved in the study of nature, and does not deny that it is possible to acquire a good knowledge of the other side of the cultural fence, as Bertrand Russell did, supposedly, he can't conceive or imagine, his thought at any rate has no recognition for, the kind of human creativity that created the English language, or any other language for that matter. Starting at the top. It won't, I think, be concluded that I opt for collectivist ideologies. Opt comes from option. Option, either or. A big part of this is that the Cartesian approach presents you with dualistic options. Either this or that. If it is not this, it must be that. Since Andreski is able to see that the individualists were not truly defending the interests of the individual, because the individual doesn't exist, only a collection of individuals. So they are actually collectivists. When Andreski realized that they weren't individualists, his only option was to call them collectivists. But what he doesn't realize is that the collective doesn't exist either. He can't see that. To him, if it's not individualistic, it must be collectivist. But really, if you start off with the collectivists, you could say they don't speak for the collection of people. Their collection doesn't exist. There are only individuals. They are actually individualists. It could go either way. Andruski serves up to the reader the very same brand of futility that he is debunking. Levis is not required to opt for one or the other. No one reading Levis would limit him to two choices, because Levis is fighting for the existence of a world of possibilities in which you understand the nature of something. You don't simply pigeonhole it as this or that. I remember when I was in graduate school, I took my master's in ESL in a theological seminary. And that seminary was committed to the idea of biblical inerrancy. As an institution, they were fighting for the survival of this concept in the public Christian realm. And this term represents a system of thought about the Bible, which I had some problems with. I thought that this system led to an abuse of certain passages, but I was not prepared to throw out the whole system. I only wanted to criticize it. However, to graduate from seminary, I had to sign a statement saying I subscribed to biblical inerrancy. I wrote in on the statement of faith that I wanted to substitute the term biblical inspiration because that does not imply a word for word correctness according to a scientific pattern. When the examiners saw that, they could not deal with it. They called me in and they said, "Are you an inerrantist? Yes or no?" I explained carefully what my reservations were, what my true opinion was, and they kept going back to, "Are you an inerrantist? Yes or no?" They didn't care what I believed, really. They wanted me to be pigeonholed. Either I am an inerrantist and I get my diploma, or I am not, and I don't. This is an example of Cartesian thinking in a Christian educational institution. If you're not this, then you are this. If you are not that, then you are this. There's nothing in between. It doesn't matter if what you are you see as in between. So, Levis does not live in that kind of a universe. he is not required to opt for collectivist ideologies. He goes on to say, the assumption inherent in the term linguistic mirage, and then I'm going to skip something, amounts to a refusal or inability to recognize an essential truth about the nature of humanitas and life. When he says a linguistic mirage, to say you're either an individualist or a collectivist, and when you say I'm an individualist, you are making a smoke screen because really you're a collectivist. When he says that, he is refusing to perceive that it is in the nature of humanity to be full-orbed, to have a third way and a fourth way and a different way. It is forcing humanity into an either-or. It is forcing life into either-or. Alive or dead. Biologically alive or biologically dead. This is what the Cartesian would say is the only meaning of life. Either you fulfill the characteristics defined scientifically for life, or you are dead. You are non-living. Whereas a philosopher might say, life is creativity. Or a poet might say, to have hope is to be alive. There is no life without hope. Okay, so the part I cut out of the sentence number 2, the phrase I cut out was, this is the gravamen of my charge against Andreski. Gravamen means the core of his charge, the gravest part of what he is accusing Andreski of. The gravest part of Levis's criticism of Andreski is that he refuses or is unable to see the third way, to see that capital L life exists in the third realm, to see that capital H humanity exists in the third realm. Olavo said, humanity is like a person. Human nature can be known the way we know a person. He illustrated this concept by saying to me, he said, suppose I, Olavo, describe Margarita to my friend or to my students, and I tell the students everything I know about Margarita, everything I know. Will they then know you? And I said, no. And he said, how can they know you? And I said, well, they would have to get together with me personally. And he said, yes, they can know you as a person. If they can meet you and spend time with you, they will know you intuitively. What cannot be conveyed by language, by Olavo telling them about me, can nonetheless be known. It can be perceived. It simply cannot be explained through language. So in the way you intuitively know a person, you can also intuitively know humanity. Olavo said to me, do you know human nature? And I said, I think so. He said, yes, you are familiar with human nature. He said, now, If every human being on the planet dies and we become extinct, will that change human nature? And I said, no. He said, that is correct, because human nature exists independently of biological life. Now, humanity has a physical reality in every human being. Life has a physical reality in every human being. However, the human being is said to be alive because it contains life. Life has existence outside of its representative existence within an individual. And in the same way, human nature has existence on its own, independent from its representative experience in any given human being. Its representative existence, in any given human being. Now, there are three kinds of reality that we have been talking about in this course. There is physical reality, mental reality, and third realm, philosophical reality, or spiritual reality, or abstract reality, whatever you want to call it. There's physical, there's mental, and then there is something else which is connected to both, but has something more. It is connected to both of these, but it has something more. This is the third realm of reality. You can call it abstract, you can call it spiritual, whatever you want to call it. Olavo explained this to me with many examples as I kept trying to force these things into the mental capacity or into the physical. Because I am a Cartesian, born and bred, and I'm only now receiving treatments to cure my illness, my mental illness. One of the examples Olavo gave me about this mode of existence. This is a mode of existence. Olavo gave me an example. He said, supposing a man has cancer and he is dying and he is in pain. Is his pain, what is the mode of existence of his pain? And I said his pain is physical. Correct. Now, consider his wife. She does not have cancer. She is in good health, young and strong and beautiful. But she sees her husband suffering, and this upsets her, grieves her, makes her cry. What kind of suffering is that? I said, that's mental suffering. And he said, yes, that is mental suffering. He said, does it have a physical component? I said, yes. She's crying. Maybe she has a stomach ache. Maybe she can't sleep at night. So, it has physical component and mental component. But what is this third realm? So far, I was able to account for all the suffering of this couple by physical and mental. But then Olavo said, what about her hopes? Her hope, her plans for the future. He said, Is hope purely mental? He said, what is purely mental does not have a ground in the physical. He said, a green dragon with pink spots is purely mental. It has no real existence. It's only an idea of the mind. But hope is something you could realistically do. You could realistically make plans to live out your years with your husband. Maybe they had money set aside to go on a cruise when he retired. Maybe they postponed going on their honeymoon until after their kids were out of the house. Maybe they had always wanted to have a bigger house, but they couldn't afford it yet, so they were saving. These hopes have an existence. They have a root in physical. They have a root in mental. But it is something more. It is something that is dying with the husband. Olavo said that hope is one of those things that exists in the third realm. He also said suffering as a concept exists in the third realm. Humanity, life, love. The other day, Andrew Kearns read an article in a magazine. And in that article, the scientist claimed to have figured out what chemicals in our mind produce love. And they had done a longitudinal study, and they had determined that the chemicals which cause love increase as you get older. Which is why, according to this scientist, as men and women get into their late years of marriage, they are less likely to be unfaithful and to have an affair, because their love chemicals increase as time goes by. This is such a Cartesian reduction of love. Think of the great stories of love. Romeo and Juliet. Think of the great literature of love. And then realize that science says it's only chemicals, nothing else. This is what they mean by their dehumanizing human beings. We should not be taken in. Okay, so the gravamen of Andreski's, of Levis's charge against Andreski amounts to a refusal or inability to recognize an essential truth about humanity and life. It means, I'm reading now, that a solution of the problem he poses. What problem does Andreski pose? The problem of linguistic mirage, of people saying, can man control his own destiny? Not realizing that man does not exist. So, the solution to the problem he poses, or doesn't, he feels himself need to pose. He doesn't need to pose a question about these collectivists. The solution to the problem must necessarily be in some sense collectivist, because it's either or. The liberal philosophical individualists, so-called, of whom he approves as true collectivists, because they're defending the interests of many, are as such committed to an account of society in basic and reductive terms of collectivity. So if you aren't an individualist, you must be a collectivist. You have no other choice. And, according to Levis, where you have collectivist liberal philosophies of society, you are likely to have also the collectivist ideologies that he obviously, as I do, hates. So he's saying that these collectivist ideologies such as communism, fascism, are inescapable because there's no such thing as the individual. Those are the only choices. But my main point is, Levis says, that he has condemned himself to the inconsistencies, his sense of which make him uneasy. So he is uneasy because these people are talking in terms that he feels don't exist, third realm terms. But he has condemned himself to the same inconsistency. When he says that third realm does not exist, he is required to categorize everything as either or. He condemns himself to the inconsistencies he is trying to reveal and expose. He can't explain why it is that we may still, he contends, entertain hope. The reason he can't explain why, is because there is no hope within his Cartesian system. He is taking aim and blasting all of these examples of Cartesian obfuscation, of lack of clarity because of misuse of words. But there is no alternative within his system. Therefore, there is no hope within his system. Of course, we know there is hope because we know there is something outside of his system. And somehow, in some corner of his soul, he feels it as well. Otherwise, he would not claim, contrary to all of his system, that there is hope. He has enough intelligence not to. He speaks of the need for ethical promptings and impulsions, which come from here. But he seems to think of them as products of the clear and logical thought, the possibility of which they are to impel us to preserve. So he is saying, think clearly and logically so that you will be ethical. And then he is saying, it is only ethical for you to think logically. If you do not think logically, you are being unethical. So it is circular. Ethics require us to be logical. Logic enables us to be ethical. It says, the possibility of which they are to impel us to preserve or restore. By restore, he is suggesting that ethics and ethical promptings and impulsions are now gone. And people they have their conscience seared, and they just will lie and put forth as serious scientific research that which they know is not supported, because their conscience is seared. So he is calling upon reason and logic to draw people into restoring the ethics. But his only hope of getting people to be logical is if he has an ethical framework impelling them to do so. I hope all this is clear. Please ask questions if it's not. All right, let's see. Though he refers to first-class creative work achieved in the study of nature and does not deny that it is possible to acquire a good knowledge of the other side of the cultural fence. That is, he does not deny that it is possible to acquire a good knowledge of literature, as he suggests Bertrand Russell did. He can't conceive or imagine. His thought, at any rate, has no recognition for the kind of human creativity that created the English language. Olavo spoke to me for quite a while about the miracle of language. Language is being created all the time, as items are drawn from the third realm and require a word or a phrase to describe them. Language is constantly growing as our world grows. I mean our inner world. Olavo said that once a philosopher said that, see if I can get it right. I'm having trouble finding my note. Basically, he said, I can't find it exactly, that a person is like a river of clear water with a clay bottom. On the bottom is murky dirt, but above is clear water, and the clear water is made up of words. At the bottom of a human soul is murky water, that which can be known but cannot be explained. And above that is a great deal of clear water, that which is known and can be explained. And you build your world with language. And as your world expands, your language expands. So there is a symbiotic relationship. There is a direct correlation between your grasp of language and ability to use it and the expansion of your world. And the kind of creativity that creates language is creativity which can intuitively perceive something and then find words to wrap around it so that the thing has shape and dimension. Have you read about the Invisible Man? The Invisible Man had to be clothed in order to be seen. So if you were to wrap bandages around him, he could be seen. Words wrap bandages around an invisible, intangible concept, allowing us to see its delineation. Olavo mentioned a word which has been borrowed from English into Portuguese. The word is delete. Now, in Portuguese, the word means erase. In English, it means destroy. It means kill or rub out. Olavo pointed out that this word in Portuguese took on a new meaning. It's not the same word when it crosses over. If there is a need in a language for a word, the language will create the word, borrowing from other languages or changing words within the language. Language is constantly being created. And it's being created because people are capable of tacit thought. And then they attempt to wrap it around with words. Andreski denies the existence of that which cannot be explained. So he cannot account for the kind of intelligence that creates language. Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. When one considers one's relation to the language one was born into, and the way in which that language exists, one finds oneself contemplating the unstateable basic truth that Andreski dismisses as the linguistic mirage. Because the relation, or the way, can't be stated, and, eluding discursive treatment, doesn't permit of logical or clear exposition, it is not for Andreski real, or anything but mystification. Yet, what is at issue is the precondition of language, thought, and objectivity. So essentially the precondition that disciplined minds like Andreski have no need to recognize it when they think objectively, or before or after. Yet it is the inescapable condition of life, and thought is a living activity. And though thinkers, even thinkers about social reality, can dismiss it as a linguistic mirage, the further their field of thought is from mathematics, the more damaging is the non-recognition to the quality of their thought. Okay, excuse me. When we discuss something, what we are doing is abstracting certain aspects from the thing and holding those certain aspects up as representative. That's what language does, that's what thought does, and that's certainly what mathematicians and scientists do. Now, the scientists and the mathematicians abstract a model or a concept, and then they neglect to account for the fact that their model is not the real thing. We need to consider our relation to language, our mother tongue, and the mode of existence of language. Now, this is where we are getting into very deep waters for me. And Olavo tried to explain this to me. And I didn't fully get it. But one thing that he explained was that there is human experience that comes before language. And you can have the experience before you have the words. In fact, in some cases, you must have the experience before you can have the words. You must have the experience before you can have the thought, and you must have the thought before you can place words on it. Olavo talked about exercises that he does with his students, and I believe you may have done these exercises with him. Exercises where he encourages a student to close their eyes and feel the passage of time, feel the change in the body, feel the solidness of the earth, feel the weight of the body, feel the press of the earth against the body. Feeling these things are precursor experiences. Also, the knowledge of space, right, left, up, down, in front, behind, far, near. These are concepts which you must understand before the words have any meaning. The experiences are precondition for language. Thought itself is precondition for language. Thought is interacting with our third realm experience and then abstracting pieces of it to tell. Olavo gave an example. He said, suppose he has an experience. For example, maybe, I'm trying to remember the one he used because I had a similar experience. Okay, maybe, I can't remember it. So maybe, I remember. Supposing Olavo describes to me the experience he had when he listened to a poet reading his own poetry. And suppose Olavo had a very moving experience seeing this man reading his poetry from the depth of his own heart. And then Olavo turns around and explains to me his experience. Now, what Olavo has done is he has abstracted certain aspects of his experience to tell me about. How he felt, how tears came to his eyes, how he had to almost leave the room because he was embarrassed, because he was weeping, how it evoked for him memories of his own childhood which he had not remembered before and couldn't put words to. Maybe he would tell me all this. Now, when he tells me this, I will not have the complete experience that Olavo had, but I will have an idea of what it was like. And if I myself had a similar experience, then I can remember my experience to fill in the blanks. And then I understand even better what Olavo may be saying. But my concept of what Olavo went through will never be exactly what he went through. It will only ever be an analogy, something similar. But it can be very close if I've had the experience myself. So, what we see here is that in our native tongue, we are able to abstract characteristics of our human experience and share them with another person. The experience comes first. The language, the choice of abstraction comes second. The language comes third, and it carries meaning to another person. If you don't recognize the precondition of language, then you will be greatly restricted in your use. If you don't leave room for third realm concepts like life and humanity. Life exists. If we wipe it out on the planet, that doesn't mean life goes out of existence, as though it never existed. Life has existence. Hope exists. Human nature exists. These things have eternal existence. They can't be just wiped out when their physical carriers are gone. Okay, so, yet, what is at issue is the precondition of language. If you don't have the third realm, if it's either or, you don't have the adequate precondition. of language, thought, and objectivity. So essentially, the precondition that disciplined minds like Andruski have no need even to recognize it when they think objectively, or before or after. They never recognize it. Yet, it is an inescapable condition of life to know intuitively. And thought is a living activity. So those who are alive can know things. And though thinkers, even thinkers about social reality, can dismiss it as a linguistic mirage, the further their field of thought is from mathematics, the more damaging is the non-recognition of the quality of their thought. You know, if you get rid of all of the abstract and third realm concepts, your writing will be so empty. Your thinking will be so empty. If you have a journal, you will write, got up at 8 o'clock, showered, ate 2 eggs for breakfast, half a piece of toast, orange juice. Out the door, 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late for work. It will be empty. It will be just a catalog of physical realities. But if you have the third realm, your biography, your life story, can have meaning that lives beyond you. You don't want your life story to be an account of what you had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and what you watched on TV. You want your life story to be a great biography, full of transcendent truth and value, interest, edification. Andrew Kearns said, "We live in an age where a person has 130 channels at his disposal to watch at any moment, and none of them contain anything of value." That's the age we live in. It's blank and empty. Yet it is an inescapable condition of life, and thought is a living activity. And though thinkers, even thinkers about social reality, can dismiss it as linguistic mirage, the further their field of thought is from mathematics, the more damaging is the non-recognition to the quality of their thoughts. In mathematics, the abstract model is, mostly almost good enough. And it's not too hard to apply it to real data. But in human experience, you need the overarching, the eternal. Or you don't have anything to say at all. I'm going to read ahead, but we're almost running out of time. So let me continue reading, but we'll not finish this next paragraph. We'll move on, and I'll read into page 42, beginning on the bottom of 41. The dangerousness of Andruski's Cartesian allegiance is seen in the way in which he offers to pass off on the reader a plausible but false, obfuscating either-or. I am far from being tolerant of the cliché about man being able to control his future, but I deplore Andruski's common-sense recourse to the word hypostatization. For as soon as we ask who is man, now we're quoting, as soon as we ask who is man, we see that he does not exist, and there are only men and women with varied and largely incompatible sentiments, dispositions, and aims. Such utterances, says Levis, need I say it, can in some contexts, be salutary common sense. But common sense is not enough, and Andruski here demonstrates this by insisting on its final authority in regard to issues that transcend its powers, even to simulate plausible engagement. The tactic, if what is so obviously uncalculating can be called a tactic, by which he seeks to legitimize his common sense stance by backing the liberal philosophical individualists as true collectivists, is naive. For as soon as we ask, who is man, we see that he does not exist. When, to quote the title of the introductory chapter of my last book, I wrote, life is a necessary word. I also wrote that life is there only in individual beings, meaning that the only way in which one can point to life as concretely there is to point to an individual being and say, there you have an actual manifestation of life. This last proposition has a meaning, to convey which meaning is a function that transcends mere convenience and is not to be disposed of by asking who or which is life. Okay, a lot of this paragraph we've actually already spoken of today. So let's see what we can do with it. The dangerousness, beginning on page 41 again, of Andreski's Cartesian alliance is seen in the way in which he offers to pass off on the reader a plausible but false and obfuscating either-or. Now, the reason Andreski's Cartesian alliance is dangerous is because it makes Andreski himself unable to recognize his own folly and fatuity, even though his common sense and clarity of thought enable him to, in some degree, probe the folly and fatuity of his colleagues. This Cartesian alliance is dangerous because it has the ability to short-circuit our thinking, to make us wrong in our rumination of absolute truth, to lead us to make wrong conclusions from our deepest thoughts. This is dangerous because people, lawmakers today, are making bad laws based on bad thinking. Parents are raising their children and handling them in bad ways because of bad thinking. Teachers are inculcating bad thinking into their students. The human race is faltering philosophically and in what it means to be human because of this pernicious Cartesian sentiment. So, the dangerousness in the example of Andreski can be seen in the way he tries to pass off one set of bad thinking in place of another set of bad thinking. A plausible but false. Plausible means it sounds good, it's believable, but false. And obfuscating, either or. Obfuscating means it creates a fog. It confuses people. It diminishes clarity. So the either or being either they're collectivist or they're individualist, as we said before, which is not the only two choices. Those are not the only choices. Levis says, I am far from being tolerant of the cliche about man being able to control his future, because Levis agrees with some of what Andreski is saying, that man, as in mankind, is not able to control his future. And people who don't think through what man really means can't think through the statement clearly. So, Levis doesn't subscribe to the idea that man can control his future. He only deplores Andreski's common sense recourse to the word hypostasization, because man, as in mankind, does exist. It is not a hypostasization. It has actual, independent existence. You'll remember hypostasization is taking a mental, something which has mental existence and treating it as though it has physical existence. Whereas man has physical existence and mental existence as an idea and third realm existence as a reality in another way. So then he goes on to quote again, "For as soon as we ask who is man, we see that he does not exist, and there are only men and women with varied and largely incompatible sentiments, dispositions, and aims." So that's the quote. "Such utterances, need I say it, can in some contexts be salutary common sense." So Levis is saying, you can see some value in pointing this out. It is true. And it does clear up some inconsistency in thinking. But common sense is not enough. And Andruski here demonstrates this by insisting on common sense as final authority in regard to issues that transcend its powers even to simulate plausible engagement. In the case of individualists and collectivists, common sense could only come up with two bad options, both of which lead to oppression and repression. And Andruski is saying still, this is the final authority. The tactic of bringing common sense either-ors and imposing them upon the situation, that tactic or strategy, if what is so obviously uncalculating can be called that. So actually Andruski is obviously doing this because that's his true worldview, not because he's trying to put one over on us or fool us. It's uncalculating. The tactic, if what is so obviously uncalculating can be called that, by which he seeks to legitimize his common sense stance by backing the liberal philosophical individualists as true collectivists, is naive. Even I, Margarita, can see that those aren't the only choices. For as soon as we ask who is man, we see he does not exist. Well, when to quote the title of the introductory chapter of my book, I wrote, "Life is a necessary word," Levis is saying that Andruski dismisses the concept of man as a hypostasization. But Levis wrote a whole book, an introductory chapter of a book, saying life with a capital L is a necessary word. You can't just dismiss these words. He easily could have said man is a necessary word. I also wrote that life is there only in individual beings, meaning that the only way in which we can point out life as concretely there is to point to an individual being and say, there you have an actual manifestation of life. This last proposition, there you have an actual manifestation of life, has a meaning. And it means that life exists and it is within this individual. And we can see it manifest here in this specific instance. This last proposition has a meaning, to convey which meaning is a function that transcends mere convenience and is not to be disposed of by asking who or which is life. We cannot just dismiss life as its biological reality, or even say it's a mental construct without a root in reality. we must concede that there is something behind that word. Something more than biological reality, something other than mental reality. Okay, let's stop here. And if you have any questions, send them off to me, and we'll talk about them. And I'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, we have a very interesting question that we've been trying to figure out the answer to. On page 38, at the very bottom, it says, and then into page 39, a basic assumption of Andreski's is that the Cartesian dualism is unassailable, having been established for good. The student asks, why do we have a basic assumption of Andreski's? How do you spell Andreski? Andreski's is. And the student rightly points out that this is redundant. Yet we do it. This is a redundancy that is common. Alessandra pointed out that people say, oh, he's a friend of Olavo's, instead of he's Olavo's friend, or he is a friend of Olavo. It's a redundancy that is very common. We do this. Now, the student also asked if the phrase could be rewritten in a different way. Now, the way the student sent it was not correct, but the way you're getting at is this. It could be written, one of Andreski's basic assumptions plural is something. One of Andreski's basic assumptions is, no apostrophe because this is plural. You use the singular form of be because the sentence, the subject is one. One is blah, blah, blah. One of what? One of Andreski's set of basic assumptions. So that would be an alternate way of writing it. Were there any more parts to this question?
No.
Okay.
There's one more question.
Another question has come.
One student asks about the meaning of the word utterances.
Utterances. I wondered if you would wonder about that word. I almost said something about it. It's in the reading for today.
Yeah, it's in the first paragraph of page 42.
Okay. Well, utterance means something you say verbally. If you utter a word, you have pronounced it. I thought it was a strange word for Levis to use in this context, because technically Andreski wrote the sentence in question.
You want me to find the exact passage?
It's right here, I have it.
Oh, okay.
The exact passage says on page 42, for as soon as we ask, who is man, we see that he does not exist, and there are only men and women with varied and largely incompatible sentiments, dispositions, and aims. Such utterances, need I say it, can in some contexts be salutary common sense. Actually, when he says such utterances, he is simply referring to the sentence he quoted. I think it probably would have been better for him to say such sentiments. But utterance emphasizes that it is a sentence that someone might speak. Some person might say this. And when they do, Levis will consider it to be an example of salutary common sense in some contexts. So the word utterance has a connotation and a denotation of spoken words. But in this context, it is referring to the quote. But I think he is suggesting that people at a cocktail party talking philosophy might say something like that. And when they say it, it represents common sense up to a point. Does that answer the question, do you think? Okay. Are there any other questions? Feel free to send them. Okay, I think we are done. And we'll begin again next week. You should read a story this week and send it to me. This is not homework, but I'm suggesting it. Read a story or speak to someone about something that happened to them and write it up as a story and send it to me. This would be a great thing for you to do this week. Maybe I'll do it, and next week I'll tell you a story as well. Let's try for that. See you later.